Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, my official conductor Eric here has given me thumbs up that it is now 1 p.m. And that means it's time for our next show, and I like 3 things that run on time: dinner, shows, and trains. So we're going to get right out of the station on time. You know, it's great to be back here in California. We have taken this show over the last 12 years literally all around the country. We're in Phoenix last weekend, which is where I now live. But it's always great to come to my home state of California. The Carolwood Society was founded by myself, Michael Broggie, and my wife Sharon. Sharon's over in the booth. Wave to Sharon. Sharon, everybody. That makes her feel wanted and welcome. She's my boss. And we founded the Carolwood Society and Foundation, and I'm going to tell you what that Carolwood means. That word has significance in Walt Disney history. You know, it's hard to believe that it's been 50 years since Walt Disney passed. It's amazing how much today we have of his presence. Well, you know, you can't do a story about Walt Disney without an ingredient called magic. A couple of years ago, a TV actor by the name of Harry Anderson did a clip for us that invokes magic. I'm going to share that with you right now.
Hi, welcome to Disneyland, USA. Today we're booked for a very special trip. This train usually goes around the park, but today it's going someplace else. Back to the time. We're going to relive the greatest moments in Disneyland's history. And we get to ride here in the Power Car. This is exciting. I've been coming here for years, but I've never gotten to do this. Sounds like they're ready to go. Come on.
Source of joy and inspiration for the entire world. It's amazing what one man has created for all of us. You know, he became the most recognized and honored individual in American history. Over 1,100 major citations and awards from countries and organizations around the world. In fact, later this month they're going to be passing out this little guy called Oscar. You know that Walt Disney's name is in the Guinness Book of Records for having won more Academy Awards than anyone else. The count is 32 Academy Awards and 64 nominations, which is also a Guinness record. Well, you know, in spite of all the awards and everything for Walt, the one part of his life that was really never told in the 1,000 books that have been written about Walt is the connection with railroads. And I submit to you, there's a deep connection between Walt Disney and trains. So I set about to write a book. Actually, I was working at the studio in publicity, and I was assigned a story to write about Walt Disney and trains, a magazine article. Well, after doing the research, the magazine article turned out to be 432 pages, 350 photographs, and 100,000 words. That's quite a magazine article. Well, we went into print on our first book 20 years ago. We now have over 20,000 copies in print. We're now in our 4th edition. And we still have a few copies left over at our booth. If you don't, some of you might have this book, maybe even a 1st edition. So those have become very valuable now. The book went on to win the Benjamin Franklin Gold Medal. It's the best book of the year, and that is a very coveted award. Only one book out of 200,000 wins that award, and we're very proud that it won that. Well, let's look at what Walt Disney represents. You know, he's known for many things, but of all the things he created, probably the most notable are the theme parks. Let's look at the history here. Disneyland, 1955. Walt Disney World, 1971. How many of you have never been to a Disney park? As a shareholder, I appreciate your support. Well, then there was Tokyo, the first park outside of the country. That was 1983, followed by Paris in 1992. Then Hong Kong, 2005. And then last summer in Shanghai, on mainland China, a Disney park. And the budget for that park, $5.5 billion. And no train. Now you would think for $5.5 billion they could at least have a train, because that's the legacy of Walt. Well, maybe someday they'll put a train in the Shanghai park. So I think this is what Walt Disney really should be recognized for, is America's steam railroad preservationist. Most people don't know that the Disney Company is the largest operation of real steam railroad equipment than any other company in North America on a daily basis. Now here's a bit of personal history. This photograph was taken by my father, Roger Brody, who was the first Disney Imagineer. And that was a Saturday. It was June 18th, 1955. That was a month before Disneyland opened. So Walt wanted me to be in the cab with him on his first run. I found out later that he owned the train as his own personal property. If you worked on the railroad, you were paid by Retlaw, which is Walter spelled backward. That was his personal company. So you actually work personally for Walt. And so in that Saturday morning, that's me, 12-year-old kid. All right, now I just gave away my age. June 18, 1955, on the eve of my 13th birthday. You do your quick calculation, you will now figure out that I am now 14. I like the sound of that, better than the alternative. So I asked Walt, as we're running around his park, I said, how did you do this? How do you create a Disneyland? And he said, Michael, I'm going to give you 4 words that all start with the letter C. They're inspirational. Remember these words and maybe apply them to goals in your life, and maybe you might want to pass them along to someone you know that could use some inspiration. And I now refer to these as Walt Disney's words of wisdom. He talked about curiosity. He said, be interested in everything. Don't be too quick to specialize. And then he talked about confidence, and he said, you know, once you're convinced you're right, believe it all over. About courage, and he said courage, you have to be prepared to defend your ideas. You know, his idea of Disneyland, his brother didn't want to do it, Roy. His own wife Lillian wanted no part of that. In fact, Roy said, Walt, you're going to put us out of business. What do you know about amusement parks? Stick to filmmaking. But Walt was also stubborn. He wanted to do his park, and he went ahead with it anyway in spite of all the counter advice. And then Walt talked about a word I didn't know. It was called constancy. And it's about trust. He said leadership begins with trust. Be dependable. Honor your word. A handshake. That should be as good as a contract. So those are words of wisdom for Walt. So hopefully maybe you'll remember them. Maybe you can pass them along to somebody you know that could use encouragement. You know, in today's world with so much negative news, it's good to have a little encouragement. Here's a picture of my father, Roger. That was when he first came to Hollywood. He arrived in Hollywood in 1928. Went to work for Disney, and they found out that he had skills and talents that he had used to build props for a filmmaker by the name of Charlie Chaplin. So my dad went to work for Disney in the 1930s. He stayed for 43 years. There's my father. This picture was taken in October 1990. at the Disney Studios. The occasion was my father being presented the Disney Legend Award, one of the few people that are in what they call the Disney Hall of Fame, the Disney Legend. That's my older brother holding the award. There's 16 members of our family in that photograph. 8 of us have worked for Disney. 6 are Imagineers. My stepmother, Mary, was the first woman to become an animator at Disney. And I was the black sheep. I was the writer, became the historian. I hope there's somebody in your family that's collecting and writing your stories for your family. It's important to pass them forward. Well, here's another form of recognition that Disney does. Have you ever noticed, you walk down Main Street, they have these windows on the second floor of the buildings on Main Street? Well, this one is at Disneyland. Can-Do Machine Works, Roger Broggie, advisor to the Magic Makers. There's always a little background story connected to the names on the windows. Can-Do Machine Works. That window is the first window on the right, on the corner as you start down Main Street toward the castle. You go to Walt Disney World in Florida, there's a window there, Roger Broggie, wheelwright. That's in the corner of the fire station and the Emporium. So the next time you're at Disneyland or Walt Disney World, you find Roger Broggie's window, you point it out to your friends or family and say, oh, there's Roger Broggie's window. I know his son Michael. We met in Pomona at the train show. Now you have bragging rights. Let's talk a little bit about America and railroading. You know, our country became the strongest industrial power in the world for one good reason. We had the best railroads. And they were built by immigrants that came from all over the world to build our railroad system. And they were finally joined together May 1869 at Promontory Summit, Utah, and they drove the Golden Spike to join the tracks of the Union Pacific and the Central Pacific. Well, eventually we built 197,000 miles of track all around the country. And you know, we've lost over 60,000 miles of that track, torn out and replaced with freeways, which now is a big mistake because it was safer, more economical, and frankly, more fun to run on rail. I don't know if you've been through a TSA checkpoint lately in an airport. That's not a lot of fun. Try riding the rail. I think you'll find it more relaxing and a whole lot more fun. Well, one of the immigrants that came to the United States to work on our railroads is this gentleman. His name, Elias Disney. That's Walt's dad. So you now know that it's in Walt's DNA. He went to work on the Union Pacific. They were laying track from Kansas City out to Denver. For 3 years, he worked as a carpenter on the Union Pacific Railroad. Well, when that job ended, he went back to Kansas City, married his sweetheart, Flora, and moved to Chicago, where they built this house on Tripp Avenue. That upstairs bedroom, December 5th, 1901, is where Walt was born. That house is now under full restoration. It's being designated a national landmark, and you'll be able to visit Walt's birthplace in Chicago. This is a picture of Walt and his younger sister Ruth. She's about 4 in that picture. And now it's 1906. And Elias decides he does not want to raise his family in Chicago. Now think about Chicago, 1906. They had the stockyards in the middle of town. They had rats infesting the whole city. You know, they even had corrupt politicians in Chicago. Can you believe that? They say you got elected to office in Chicago, you serve 2 terms, 1 in office and 1 in jail. I don't know if that's true, but they have their issues. Well, Elias decides we're getting out of Chicago, and they found a 40-acre farm in north central Missouri called Marceline. Had any of you ever been to Marceline, Missouri? It's a good bucket list item. It's a cute little town, 2,500 population when the family moved there in 1906. And you know, you go to the annual festival they do every year, population is still 2,500. It never grew up. And on the little farm was this barn where Walt put on his first show as a farm boy. He was 7 years old, and he put on a circus show for the neighborhood kids. Now, who would have known that that little farm boy would have ever amounted to anything in entertainment? And he's doing shows for the local kids. kids. This is Murray's store in Marceline, where Walt got his first pair of overalls, and is still run by the Murray family. So they pay tribute to Walt every September when they have their festival, honoring their legacy with Walt Disney. And you know, this is what Walt pays tribute to on Main Street at the parks. It's the small mom and pop businesses that built the country. It wasn't the big discount box stores. It was the small family-owned businesses that built our country. This is a photograph of Walt when he was about 14. He wanted to learn to draw. He went to his dad and said, "Would you pay for art lessons? There's a teacher in town." And Elias said to his son, "You want to take art lessons? I have an idea for you. You go out and you get a job and you pay for your own art lessons." Kids did things differently in those days. They wanted something, went out and worked for it, and earned money. So he goes to his older brother Roy, who's 8 years older, and said, "Roy, what can a kid my age do to earn some money?" He said, "Why don't you do what I did and Thomas Edison? We got a job working on the railroad. It's called a news push. Sell goods to passengers like newspapers, sodas, and fruit. You have your own little business." So he liked that idea, went down to the Missouri Pacific, applied for that job, worked all summer, riding the rails, selling goods to passengers, saved his money. Then he went up to Kansas City, enrolled in the Kansas Art Institute. Now he dropped out of school in the 10th grade. And kids, that is a terrible idea. You do not want to drop out of school. Although Walt did go on to get 5 honorary doctorate degrees from places like Harvard and USC. So for a dropout, he did okay, but it's not recommended. So he starts a little company in Kansas City making cartoons for local theaters. Unfortunately, he went bankrupt. So by the time Walt was 21, he'd started his own company and went broke. Well, they called his older brother, Roy, who's now in LA. And Roy says, "Come out here, we'll put a company together," and they did. It's called the Disney Brothers Cartoon Company, the year 1923. So if you've heard of the organization D23, that's what the 23 means. It's when the company was formed. And this is their first star, her name Virginia Davis. They did 35 episodes of Alice in Cartoonland. They're now available on DVD, combining cartooning and live action in the 20s. One day a lady's visiting LA from Lewiston, Idaho. Her name was Lillian Bounds. There was a job opening for an artist, paid $10 a week. So Lillian applied for that job, and the lady that was doing the hiring said, "Lillian, let me give you some really good advice. One of the men who owns this company is single. He likes to date the ladies that work here. That is a terrible idea. Don't date the boss." Lillian didn't listen. She married the boss 2 years later. Now just think of it, ladies, 41 years, and this is Walt Disney. She was his compass, his toughest critic, his counselor and advisor. She was the real power behind the man, was Lillian Disney. They raised 2 daughters, Diane and Sharon. And I want you to know the name Lillian Disney. Most people have never heard of her. When I was writing my book, I went to her and I said, "Mrs. Disney, would you do me the honor of writing a foreword to my book?" She'd never written a foreword to any book. This book is the only book that has a foreword by Mrs. Walt Disney. And she lived to be 98 years old. Imagine what the world would be like if Walt had lived as long as Lillian. Well, this is the first character that made the company successful, Oswald the Lucky Rabbit. This is a model sheet for Oswald. Now, look at that body. Does that look a bit familiar? Let's look at a comparison. I think we just discovered something. See Oswald? There is a familiar between the two. Is it possible that Mickey, in fact, is not a mouse? He's actually a rabbit that had his ears surgically altered, which is not unusual for Hollywood. Little plastic surgery. And so Mickey is actually a rabbit in disguise. Now, as Paul Harvey used to say, you know the rest of the story. And that also explains why the partner statue in the hub of Disneyland, Mickey stands 3 feet tall. You could stretch out a big rabbit to 3 feet. You couldn't do that with a mouse. Well, Mickey went on to become the first non-human to win his own Academy Award in 1932. And that started the company on its road to success. Now here's a picture of my two favorite cartoon characters. You know the one on the right, the one on the left. You may have heard of Walt Kimball. Anybody heard of Walt Kimball? In my opinion, America's greatest railroader. I'll tell you why. He didn't have model trains, he had full size in his backyard in San Gabriel.
This locomotive is the pride and joy of the Grizzly Flats Railroad. It's an old 1881 Baldwin Mogul, made in Philadelphia, USA. And we bought it in 1938. We took it all apart and restored it. This locomotive has a very beautiful bell. I'm going to ring it for you so you can see. And here it rings. Isn't that pretty? Now let's inspect our 1883 passenger cars, all made out of wood, filled with plush seats. This used to run on the Carson, Colorado Railroad in Nevada, one of the historical old narrow gauges. Come on, let's see inside. The great old car, I think we paid $50 for it. They were burning these out in Nevada and scraping the iron out for scrap. And that just broke my heart. So I saved this one, $50. The first vacation that Walt Disney ever took in his life, he did with me, and it was 1948 at the Chicago Railroad Fair. And the nurse told him, he says, "You're working too hard. They're coming down here on Saturday and Sundays and inspecting storyboards. You gotta relax." And he says, "You know, that guy Kimball seems to be relaxed all the time." So he called me up, and he says, "This is Walt. How'd you like to go back to the railroad fair?" I couldn't believe it. First of all, he never took time off. And so when I really knew it was Walt talking, I said, sure. In Arizona, the conductor came to Walt and says, "How'd you guys like to ride in the cab in the diesel locomotive?" And so we climbed up into the cab, and Walt got to pull a whistle for all of the little crossing sounds. And here again, it's like a little kid, never done anything like this, and we had the time of our life riding that diesel through the state of Arizona on our way to Chicago.
What Ward said about Walt was very important. He was like a little kid. The truth of the matter is, Walt never grew up. He always looked at life through the eyes of children. That's why he created family entertainment. It's interesting to note the Disney company is the last motion picture company that still traces back to its original founders. All the rest of them have either gone out of business, been merged, or acquired. Only the Disney company stands as a testament to the value of family entertainment. And Ward's equipment is now on display at the Orange Empire Railway Museum. Their booth is right on the other side of that curtain, so drop by and pick up their brochure. You'll see the Emma Nevada fully restored on display there. In fact, up here on our table we have the model of the Emma Nevada created by Bachman, and it's for sale over at Gold Coast Station. My friend Hans has marked it down to half its list price, so if you want a good deal on a G-scale Emma Nevada, that's it right there. You know, Disneyland celebrated its 50th year in 2005. They did something special for Ward. They found a 1901 Baldwin Forney engine, fully restored it, put Ward Kimball's name on the cab. It's number 5 on the headlamp, Jiminy Cricket in gold. One of the many characters that Ward created for Disney was Jiminy Cricket. Number 5, it's the 5th engine at Disneyland. Here's another fellow that influenced Walt. His name, Ollie Johnston, another one of the original animators for Disney. Instead of full-size like Ward, he had 1/12 live steam in his backyard, and here's Walt discovering that hobby in Ollie's backyard. Here he's in the backyard of Dick Jackson in Beverly Hills. There's Walt on the throttle. There's Ward. Look at that big smile on his face. Sometimes lucky kids got to go on these outings with Walt. Here's a group of kids enjoying a backyard run. I don't know about this guy though. He doesn't look like he's too happy. He's got no safety belt. There's no helmet. That kid could roll right off of that train and be injured. That's me. Remember what Walt taught me about courage? I'm still working on it as a 6-year-old. Well, Walt decides he's going to have a backyard railroad. So he buys 5 acres of land on a street in West LA in Homey Hills called, wait for it, Carrollwood Drive. That's the street they lived on. So hence the name Carrollwood. Then he goes into the shop at the studio, says to my dad, I want you to build a miniature railroad for my new backyard. Remember the window on Main Street? My dad says, oh sure Walt, we can do that. And Walt leaves and my dad says to the guys working for him, now what am I going to do? I don't know anything about miniature railroad. Well, they learned really quick. And they ended up scratch building this railroad for Walts Backyard.
When the model train buzzed at me, I decided my locomotive would be modeled after a Central Pacific locomotive that was built in Sacramento in the year 1872. It's old-time diamond stacked in treatment. It was built to a scale of 1.5 inches to the foot. After the track layout had been worked out on paper, 3 months were spent excavating my backyard to fit the plan of the layout. By careful planning on blueprints, we were able to lay about 2,600 feet of track. Tunnels and trestles were used in a practical way to fit the terrain of the yard, but they also added to the scenic beauty of the layout. Of course, the hardest part of the job was convincing my wife that the flower beds had to go. But with the winning of the right-of-way, the job continued. The tracks were laid on first-scale redwood ties over a 2-inch layer of crushed rock ballast. The rail spikes were dipped in rosin to hold better in the redwood ties. Then the ballast was camped between the ties with the help of a crew that had actually had experience laying tracks for a big railroad. While waiting for the locomotive to be completed, my impatience got the best of me. I decided to take a trial run without it. I didn't know I had company. My daughters and friends were on hand with their reaction. Dad at it again. Many of the castings and fittings of the locomotive were machined in the studio machine shop and assembled there before delivery to the backyard layout. The locomotive and tender weigh about 500 pounds, and this amazing little boiler generates enough steam to haul about 2 tons. With the arrival of the locomotive, it made it easier to complete the laying of the track. It was a big help to haul ballast from the gondola. I might point out again how important it is to the railroad hobbyist that everything is built to perfect scale.
Now, there's no doubt that Walt was a perfectionist, and it followed with his miniature railroad. And it's interesting that at that time, 1951, the story department at the studio got an idea to do a cartoon with Donald Duck, and he has a 1/8 scale miniature live steam railroad in his backyard. I'm sure that was just a coincidence. So are there any kids here who would like to see a real Donald Duck cartoon? How about, no more kids in here? How about all of us kids, right? All right, there we go. Let's take a look at what happens when Donald has to battle those pesky chipmunks for control of his railroad.
Who gets stuck with all of that luck? No one but Donald Duck.